Welcome to part 2 of the track breakdown for 73, my collaborative project with Amir De Bois, out on Different Music. In this video, we'll be looking at the drums for our project and all of the percussion elements that went into it. This is by far the largest part of the project. Make sure to check out part 1, link in the description, covering all the bass sounds. And finally, please smash the like button, hit subscribe if you enjoy the content. And yeah, without further ado, let's crack on with the video. The drums is where I think we put in the majority of the work. Just getting this right, getting the vibe right. So she's got 2 kicks, a layer. So let's have this in. This, I believe, is Amir's kick, which he had in the initial project. It's got a really nice body. It's got that higher frequency content. Hard to see here. So this. It's got that rumble. And then I added in a kick from one of my sample packs to just give it a bit more punch. Just adding that clickiness. And together they sound nice and punchy. There's a bit of phasing going on, but it sounds nice, so we left it in. We didn't want to touch that. Yeah, nice click, nice body, and it's tuned to the sub as well, so meaning that those sit really nicely together. They almost sound like they belong together, right? So tuning your kick, especially the fundamental of the kick, is really important if you want your sub and kick to sit in the same space and to sound like they are cohesive. It's a trick I always use in my tracks to just make things sound gel together. On the snare side of things, this doesn't happen until later. We don't introduce the snares until the B section of the track, after a short break. So let's have a listen to it all here. And it's this really sharp 1-2 for the first and second snare. This being the first snare being a little bit more of a percussion sound, and that's nice. It creates a bit of dynamics rather than having like a, one snare sound that sounds very similar to another. Doing this, which I've learnt from listening to a lot of Motown's tracks, they like to do percussive sounds, toms, perks, and marry them up with a snare quite close to them, and that creates a really nice dynamic. And this acts as a bit of a call and response, where this is the call. And it's setting up this kind of tension, like something big's happening, and then it dies down again. And it's kind of a marker for the track to get more progressed as we introduce the second snare set, I should say the third and fourth snare in the B progression. So when those come in, play just before. Sorry. And yeah, to solo those two. We've got 4 totally different snare sounds, and it creates a really nice dynamic call and response happening between these two. We also got another snare come in on the second drop, and this is where we lift that energy even more. So it's a gradual rise, breakdown, and then everything drops in. And I'd say this is more of a typical snare that I would use. Quite crunchy, covering that higher frequency spectrum. So let's listen to them all. So now you're getting a real conversation between these different snares happening, really pulling you back and forth with the track. But it's not enough, right? As you can hear, there's a bunch of perks here that really seal the deal, and we have these towards the end of the phrases to signal the close of a 4-bar loop. And I believe these two. Also got a little break here. Really like this one, just adding a bit of tonality in, because if you have just snare sounds and perks that are not very tonal, you end up with a quite flat sounding mix. And that can be desirable sometimes, but for this one for sure we wanted to add some tonal stuff to really jump out of the mix. And I think they do, if we listen to it in context. So yeah, keeping it simple. Really every sound in terms of the percussion has its own slot in the mix, its own space in the arrangement. There's no sounds really crossing over other than the perks, which are complementing each other. I've got some breaks, which are also complementing that end of phrase. But they are using the same snare sound as used in the snare channels. Zoom out a bit, see what we can see. Right. That final energy lift comes from the hats. We've got some rides happening earlier on. These ones, so they establish like a pickup in pace after the first section, after the drop. So the B section, we get that nice rhythmic kind of increase in pace. But then we need to pick up the pace even more for that second bit. We keep these hidden. I say hidden, we keep them quiet for that section because we want something new to come in, and then these come in as a bit of a reprise to reference the B sections before the breakdown. So we've just got these 8s. Really simple stuff. And then after, how many bars is that? 16 bars, we've got the 16ths happening. So it's like we lift the pace on the drop, we lift the pace again, 16 bars in, and then for the C section, we keep the pace going, but we introduce the rides, which were 4, and you get this nice kind of building up. And it means we can also drop out the hats, the 16ths, to bring back down the pace towards the outro. It's just creating this kind of wavy layer that picks up the pace and then gently brings you back down. And I believe so yeah, these are nice and almost percussion sounds. They sound quite percussion-y rather than hi-hatty, but yeah, it works for this track for sure. And that sums up the drums. In terms of processing, we did a lot of this processing on individual tracks, on the individual sounds themselves in sound design sessions. So keeping the arrangement as simple as possible in terms of mixdown. This isn't an approach I use anymore that much. I actually have far more complicated projects, but it's worth approaching tracks like this because it keeps things simple. It keeps you quite focused on arrangement, and I think this track is a better arrangement than some of my newer tracks, which where the focus has been far more on kind of big mix decisions and trying to squeeze things into small gaps. Here there are lots of gaps in terms of frequency spectrum where I don't have to worry about that. So the focus is far more on simple decisions, EQs. Really, it's just high-pass EQs everywhere on things which just don't need low content, but they may have had some introduced in the sound design process. I would usually do compression on my snare channels, like my snare groups, but here I'm just adding a limiter to cap it. You could use a clipper as well here, but I do like how the Pro L2 sounds in certain situations. This one is adding a bit of snap because there is actually a hidden compressor in the L2 which acts before. Is it before or after the limiting stage? It must be before. But yeah, selecting these styles will essentially give you a different kind of compression. And that's why you've got these attack and release settings here. But yeah, you can get a nice snap. And I think here I'm just using it to make sure it doesn't peak. Yeah, I mean 2 dB of gain reduction. You're not going to hear that really. But yeah, using a clipper I could have used here instead for the same result. In terms of the mix, we've got a big increase in a reverb send. Again, my reverb sends on this are extremely simple. I've only got one, and it's just a bright large room in Pro R. That's really all it is. I think I've done a bit of attenuation here on some of the highs. But yeah, keeping it simple, and this was just to get the sense of progression towards the outro, where we introduce the drone again and it gets a bit more spacious. So the snare was sounding a bit dry, and just adding this really slow ramp makes it a nice seamless transition. By the end, and you get this really cavernous sound. Yeah, I like to do that a lot in my tracks. Other tracks I would probably do it even more as kind of build-ups towards different sections to make that change really obvious. But here it just worked having it at the end. I think the main bit of processing I've actually done on here is just putting a drum bus on it, and that's quite a lazy way of working, but it just works. I really like the way that, in particular, this drum arrangement and sound palette, how it was impacting the drum bus, or at least how the drum bus was impacting those particular sounds together. I don't use it that often because it's quite a crunchy sound, and I think you can hear as well in some of the highs. Like if I solo the hats, you can hear there's some nasty clicks going on, and if we look in here, you can't see them, but they are there. Like I can hear them, and this is a little quirk from the drum bus, particularly the Ableton drum bus, that I've noticed. High frequency content does not react well due to this plugin. That said, in the mix entirely, it works, and I like the crunch that it gives these particular drums, and the fact that this track also is using a lot of textures that are really distorted, and it's supposed to be a rougher sounding track. It makes sense to use this plugin, but usually if I wanted a clean sound, I would use something far more transparent. And I think I've actually turned it down for this case, but this was at 8%, so I can play you that. Listen, it's just that drive, it's just adding some real crunchiness, especially in those high mids and high frequencies. They're getting it almost a little bit too much, and I think the mastering engineer probably had some things to fix in that area. And really I'm using it mostly for the drive and this compression. So without and with. Raising the volume, but also just adding a bit of punch. I mean, without it, it's night and day. It's really bringing up that body of the kick, which is great. There is a sound in here, might be in the perks section, which would make sense, which is, how would I describe it? It's almost a lead sound in a way, the way we use it here. Having it kind of change in pitch really draws your ear to it in a melodic way. And it is, you know, deliberately tuned to be in key with the sub, the basses, and the kicks, so that it's pleasing to the ear. It's not kind of a dissonant. It's not dissonant in terms of harmony. It is, I would say, it is a dissonant sound, but we can argue about whether that's even a thing. You can hear there's movement within it, so there's some automation going on to make this not just a static, you know, clicking sound. It's also highly distorted, very bandpassed, just keeping it in a very particular section of the frequency spectrum. And this is basically married with the snare, where the like snap of the snare is. I'd say it's like snap of the snare probably lives here, the body of the snare lives here and just below. And yeah, it works nicely in filling that frequency kind of spectrum, and also keeping the pace in areas where we don't have lots of hats and we don't have you know, as many snares. You know, this is essentially the defining sound of the track for me, because it keeps everything, it's like a metronome, it's just keeping it moving forward. And yet here we have it pitching down as a kind of a progression, because when we had it before we had the pitching, it was starting to get pretty annoying. And I think, you know, it's a sound which sits in that frequency spectrum that can really dig in your ear. I'm sure the mastering engineer did some magic to kind of atone for that, for the sins of this sound. But yeah, just to make it less annoying and to give it some kind of more presence in terms of like it's a sound that is in the forefront and needs to do something new and interesting. Having it change at the 16 bar mark is a way for it to, you know, move on and like you not to get as annoyed with it. And also breaking it here is a nice touch. Like this sound allows for it, as it's a very constant sound, it allows for a lot of little changes having big impacts, like having those like slight variations which your ear picks up, and then these little gaps where suddenly it doesn't play, you know, this bit here. It changes that kick, that downbeat, it changes the emphasis of it, having removed that very rhythmic sound for like just one of them. Yeah, it's a trick we've used in Motown collabs as well, having a very constant sound and then messing with the rhythm just for a bar adds a lot of interest for very little effort. You can, you know, put it in and change a small thing and your ear just like latches onto it very quickly and identifies it as a kind of rhythmic syncopation, which is great. I love using syncopation in my music.